and it's absolutely meaningless, and nothing has been coming out on that at all. 30 years ago, Herb York, the first director of Livermore Lab, and some of you know Livermore Lab, have sadly gotten arrested at it. He was the first director of it, devoted especially to production of the H-bomb. He gave a talk at Livermore Lab. I got to know him later in life. And a very interesting guy, actually. And very, very insightful in many ways. But he gave his talk at Livermore, which is quite striking. I remembered it, and it was very hard for me to track it down again. 1990. And he said he wanted to talk about the notion of minimum deterrence. He accepted the notion that some deterrence was essential, or at any rate was certainly realistic and was going to go on for a long time. The question was, how much do you need? And he wanted to answer Michael May, who again is not the worst guy at Livermore. That's not the worst. He was talking about 5,000 weapons. And he wanted to question that as something to get down to. That was 30 years ago. That's what we're down to now when we have Operation Weapons. So he quoted George Bundy that he said on retirement from the government as having said that in the real world of political leaders, where people like my colleagues at RAND and in the Pentagon, we're talking about assuring at least World War II type casualties on Russia at the very minimum, because they had understood that they got through that very well, and that wouldn't slow them down at all. 120 million killed had to be greater than that. Or that it would be very good that we should spend any number of billions of dollars getting our casualties out of war from 200 billion, 250 million, like that. And McGeorge Bundy was saying this is totally unrealistic. This is not the way politicians really think about the world. And don't take too much reassurance from this from Bundy, that's another story. But he did say this. He said, in the real world of political leaders, as York quotes him, any policy which in advance was known to bring a single hydrogen weapon on a city of one's own country would be regarded in advance as a catastrophic blunder. 10 weapons on one's own country would be a disaster beyond history. And then he ended by saying, 100 is unthinkable. Now, we had at that time about 30,000 weapons. So York asked the question, he said, I'll approach it two ways. How can we arrive at a number, if we do accept the notion of deterrence, at least in a transitional period toward abolition for some period, what is a reasonable number to deal with, facing Michael May's estimate of 5,000? And he said, first, you start with the notion of what it takes to deter. This was in 1990. In 1991, we attacked, we went into the Gulf War after Kuwait. How many weapons, he didn't ask this because it was a year earlier, how many weapons would Saddam Hussein have had to have to deter the mighty United States of America from the Gulf War at that point? Would it be 5,000 or 1,000 or like one? North Korea has like 10. Now, we don't know if they're actually weaponized, but they have enough material for 10. The talk of attacking North Korea, which existed under Clinton in 1994, went away, even under George Bush, with those weapons. So they do have some effect for some people in that order. So he says something between, looking at it from that point of view, somewhere in the range of to deter 1, 10, or 100, he says. But now let's look at it from another point of view, which I've never heard anybody raise before. What's the largest number you would want any one political leader to have in the way of destructive power at his own control? Is there some limit to that? Can there be too much for any leader, even an American leader? Supposing you take the ability to create destruction on the level of World War II in a day, or 2 days, like 60 million people. He said, that would be about 100 weapons. He said, maybe a little more, maybe less, quite possibly less. But in his expert opinion, you have 100 weapons. Remember, as I said, we had about 30,000 then, or somewhat less. 5,000 now. So the sense that he came to was, from both points of view, he says, I don't know exactly the point is that you need, I know it's not in the neighborhood of 1,000, he said 30 years ago. It's not 5,000. It may in truth be less than 100, but he said from this point of view of the total destruction, he says what you can really justify is something between from 1 to 10 to 100 and closer to 1 than 100. That's almost certainly true. That means that the numbers that are batted around by this administration and everyone before it are wildly out of the world of reality. And this, oddly, this was in 1990. He doesn't make any mention of nuclear winter. I suspect he'd been influenced by his Livermore colleagues that nuclear winter doesn't really exist. I'm sure that if he were doing it now, he'd have to recognize even 100 thermonuclear winter weapons, which Pakistan and India don't have, can kill everybody. Okay, well I've used up, that I think shows us in a way what our task is here, and what kind of critique we should bring to bear. Congress should be doing what it has never done, and that is have classified hearings, but open hearings, leading toward open hearing, of the exact environmental impact, as they say, of any of the multitudes of options that have come about since then. That has never been done. It could not, of course, I think nuclear glasnost of that kind, which I'd hoped for from Gorbachev, and we lost him before he got, just before I think we got to that point, could, I think, wake us up, if anything can, from this nightmare of relying on threats and capabilities for world destruction. Will we make any of these changes? Will we get down to 5 or 10 nuclear weapons in a matter of a few years? The kinds of human and societal characteristics that Dennis was talking about make that very unlikely, but not impossible. Actually, nothing human, societal is impossible. I would suggest that an individual death within 150 years or something is pretty certain. Nothing else is certain like that involving humans. I would say that it is a miracle that we are here from the perspective of 1961, 1971, 81. It's a miracle that we are here today with the doomsday machines that I've described, which are currently still in operation, ready to go, alert. Against what? Against a Russia that wants to be our ally, essentially, but can be triggered at any time by accident or anything else. Still exists. We are on the Titanic, traveling very fast at night in iceberg waters, and we can see icebergs ahead. Not only the nuclear, we see the climate, we see toxics, we see depletion. We see icebergs ahead, but one of those, and I'm so glad that Dennis did mention, in addition, as I knew he would, is one of the few who talks not only of climate in catastrophic terms, but also the continuing nuclear catastrophe. And of course, the very existence of this stuff is a moral catastrophe every minute of the day, a judgment on our species, a judgment on civilization, on science, on everything else. The mere existence of these capabilities and these thoughts, even if they have just been planned, they're not incorporated in actual possibilities. The Titanic didn't have to go down. There were many ships in the water in the same area that night. None of them hit icebergs. They stopped dead in the water, knowing there were icebergs ahead, till it was daylight. They reversed course in some cases. They went by a southern route each of which, by the way, was proposed early before it was too late on the Titanic. But the owner of the line wanted to set a speed record, had to go through that particular rate, had to go at that high speed, had to go at night, couldn't stop. If he was going to spend on the maiden voyage a speed record, that just happens. The kinds of human, was he, you know, were those evil incentives? Well, no, but the risks were clear. And he was obeyed by the ship's officers who knew what the risks were. I repeat, we are on the Titanic right now. Is it too late to change course in time? Obviously, as humans, as Dennis has pointed out, we have this amazing human species capability of learning, communicating, loving, caring, inventing, imagining, changing in a way that no other species can do. It has two sides. It's given us the doomsday machine, but it has also given us the capability of change, but that change is essential. Unless the machine is to be, was it Tanguy or the artist who created a self-destructive machine, I think, as a piece of art at one point. Is that where we are? The odds are, yes, that we can't change in time for this. That's where the odds are. But no one can prove that it's impossible to make these changes. We can't know that it's impossible. Miracles have happened. The fact of 60 years without those weapons going off is a miracle. So it shows miracles have happened. But we've seen others that, by the way, I would not have predicted this particular miracle. I would not have expected that I'd be here alive with our nuclear weapon from the perspective of the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. But beyond that, the change in the USSR, the change in South Africa, the change in Spain and Portugal, even the changes in Latin America today, but especially the ones I just mentioned, predicted by no one. They looked impossible, if anything was. But nothing is, quite. It was unlikely, but they did happen. The people here, I know many of you, have been working for a long time, as I have been, as if it were not too late. As if it were possible to change, and no one can show that we were wrong to the ends of our life. And after that, it will never be known. Looking back, if there is a looking back, some people can say it was too late. They didn't have a chance. And certainly there's a lot of evidence for that right now. But definitely we are not entitled even to believe that with high confidence and say, that's why I'm giving up. And that's why none of you here are doing it. That's why you're here tonight. And so what it comes down to is, as long as there are people who are trying to dismantle the doomsday machine and to dismantle the attitudes that led to it, and the priorities and the values that made it look legitimate or unjustifiable or justifiable, which if you think about, that's quite a task. If you can make that look justifiable, you have a great career ahead of you in Pentagon and advertising and everywhere else. But that's what has to be changed. Dennis has laid out the way. He and Barbara Lee showed that even in Congress, one can speak for this and can move in that direction. There's so many other heroes here tonight who have done of mine, like Father Louis Vitale, who led me onto the test site for the first time 30 years ago. And next to him, Clara Greensfeld, who's been at this forever. Joanna Macy, I could go through the whole audience, the ones I know. Every one of them has earned my gratitude, my admiration, my respect, and is the basis for my hope. Thank you.